Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Wayne, and this afternoon and this evening I'll be presenting on retirement planning. I'll be joined by Tina Tran, one of our most experienced financial planners, who I'll be referring to with a number of slides. And also joining us this afternoon is Justin Colley, and he'll be monitoring the chat box. So for those of you that wish to ask a question in writing, please feel free to do so. At the end of the session, I will circle back to Justin just to see that if there's anything further either myself or Tina should explain, or whether all the questions have been fully addressed. This presentation is being recorded and will be available tomorrow on YouTube, and is also being live streamed currently on Facebook. Firstly, I'd just like to do an acknowledgement of country. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I work and live, and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and community. I pay respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to point out, with all these presentations, it is general advice. So nothing that we say this afternoon or this evening will be specific to your circumstances. So please treat it as general advice. We will speak about avenues that you can pursue if you wish to get personal advice, and also where you can get further information if you wish to do a bit of personal research. So we'll talk about retirement goals. Now, depending on your circumstances, your age, perhaps even where you're living, your retirement goals are going to differ enormously between different people, and perhaps even different family circumstances. However, Tina's one of the planners that speaks to people every week of every year on their retirement goals. So Tina, if I can just pass to you for a moment, just to speak briefly about what people are coming to you with and what their retirement goals tend to be, particularly given the year or the 12 months or the 18 months we've had with COVID.
Retirement goals for people, a lot of the travel plans were obviously affected, and to some extent it's not financially worse off, because it meant that the money they have anticipated they might have spent, they didn't end up spending. But I think that would probably come back in future years. So it's probably just been pushed forward. But I think the retirement goals predominantly are centered around a lifestyle. And for most people, what they're accustomed to is what they'd like to be able to continue to live in retirement. And perhaps because they've got more time, doing more of that travel, which is going to potentially cost more. Spending more time with family isn't going to cost more, and just sort of the general lifestyle, maintaining fitness, that sort of stuff. So it's really understanding what the life's going to be like to be able to then work out and quantify the cost that's going to be needed in order to fund retirement.
Thank you, Tina. One of the questions that constantly comes up from people looking at retirement, and in what we call that pre-retirement phase, is how much will I need to live on, and do I have enough? The Australian Superannuation Fund Association, ASFA, have put together some guidance around this. So now it's difficult, obviously, to provide guidance for retirees that vary from Hobart to Cooktown to Broome and all the way down to Perth and everything in between. It is nigh on impossible to get that accurate for everybody. However, they do provide some numbers as a very rough guidance, and I'll ask Tina just to speak to some of those numbers and how realistic they are.
Certainly. So if you can see on the left column, the full age pension. A full age pension has been costed out really just to meet expenditure. It's probably just on, I would say just maybe on the poverty line or just above the poverty line. So a lot of people who are planning retirement would like to have a better lifestyle than that. The next figure, we've got the ASFA modest figure. So that gives a little bit more income above the age pension to provide for that extra lifestyle. But for most of our members, they would like to target at least the ASFA comfortable retirement figure. And with the ASFA comfortable retirement figure and the modest figure, the assumption there is that you do own your own home. So you're not paying off any mortgages. For a couple, you're running one car. So that means that if you are in a situation where you want to continue to run two cars, probably with regards to traveling overseas, for example, in the comfortable figure, it's once every 2 to 3 years. So if your retirement lifestyle is that you'd like to be able to fund an overseas trip every year, then you're going to need to dial up that estimate a little bit more than the average figure. So that's just a benchmark as a starting point, and then it's a case of looking at how your lifestyle compares to the benchmark, and it may mean that you might need to dial it up, or you could dial it down depending on how that compares. So it's a good starting point, but it's important to understand what those assumptions are, and ASFA does have a breakdown of those budget figures for what they've benchmarked for each of the items. For example, house costs, there you've got that, and car running costs, medical expenses, and so forth. So with the comfortable retirement, it is assumed that you could afford to fund private health cover, for example, but you wouldn't on a modest figure.
Thanks, Tina. As Tina mentioned, the ASFA do publicise their assumptions, and they go into a lot of detail on what they consider comfortable, what they consider modest. So it is interesting to read, but as I say, by its nature, it has to be somewhat subjective. If you have a look at some of those things in the table, you'll see good clothes, you'll see affordable bottled wine. There is some subjectiveness naturally enough to all of those things, but as we say, it is treated as highly indicative, and it is a very good tool to use. Taking a holistic view is the way people should look at their situation when they are heading into retirement, and take a broad view of their financial situation, which will include things beyond their superannuation fund. And again, I'll refer to Tina because she'll be able to speak about the assets that people do have and often do consider when they're going into retirement.
Typically, most people are going to be looking at their superannuation as their assets that they're going to rely on for retirement. But if you haven't got a lot of money built up in superannuation because let's say you've invested in a residential investment property, or possibly shares, or in cash and term deposit, that of course could also be considered and utilised as part of your retirement funding. The other one that a lot of people may not have considered is their principal place of residence. Now, not everyone plans to downsize, but if that is part of your plan in the future, whether that's because the home is too large and it becomes more difficult for you to maintain, and downsizing could result in a surplus lump sum from the move, well, that certainly could be considered as part of your retirement funding as well. And sometimes for some people, it might mean they have to do that if they have insufficient superannuation or other investment assets to fund the sort of retirement lifestyle that they want. Then they certainly could identify that potential difference if they were to downsize that could add to their retirement. So when we're providing advice, we're going to look at the full financial position, identify what the retirement goals are, and see how you can structure what you've got in order to be able to meet those priorities.
And when we talk about the pre-retirement stage and going into retirement, people often talk about the tax and the various tax treatments of the various structures that you can use. So Tina, would you be able to expand just on the contents of this slide where we talk up to 15% tax and then we move to a nil tax position?
Certainly. One of the major advantages of building your retirement savings under superannuation is the tax concessions. And what are we talking about in terms of tax concessions? If you're investing in, say, outside of super in your own name, whether it's a term deposit or shares or residential investment property, any income that you generate from that investment, you will be paying tax on that income at your marginal tax rate. Now, if your marginal tax rate is likely to be, at least 34 cents in the dollar or 37 cents in the dollar because you've got salary, then you're going to be losing some of that income to a higher rate of tax than comparison where if the funds were invested under the superannuation umbrella. Within superannuation, the funds pay a tax of up to 15% in income that's generated. So you get to keep more of the investment earnings when it's in this superannuation umbrella. And that's one of a major advantage, because that basically means that the more you get to retain, the faster it's going to accumulate. Now, when we move into the next phase of superannuation, or I could say the middle phase of superannuation, there's no difference on the income tax within the fund internally. It's the same as the superannuation, but it is possible for you to be able to start drawing out an income when you're achieve the minimum preservation age to start a transition to retirement pension. But the most sort of beneficial is when you're in retirement. So in the retirement phase where your superannuation can be converted to a pension, you've got the benefit of tax-free investment earnings, and the pension payment that you're pulling out from your pension is tax-free. So it doesn't add to any other taxable income. And really that's a very simple structure, particularly in retirement. You don't have to be concerned about any income tax or investment earnings tax in your account-based pension.
And when you're funding your retirement and you're moving towards the retirement phase, there's often these three age groups that are discussed, and they're talked about because the treatment of superannuation in each of these brackets is slightly different. So again, Tina, if I can refer to you, can you just speak to the characteristics of retiring, if you can, at age 58, 59 versus those over 60 and those over 65?
So this is what everybody wants to know for sure. If you're accumulating in superannuation and you want to know when you can access it. And there's different ages floating around for superannuation. So the age that you've got there between 58 and 59, that's the minimum preservation age now. It is progressively being moved up to age 60, but preservation age means that's the minimum age in which you have reached to be able to access your superannuation under a retirement condition of release. And the definition for condition of release for retirement when you're under 60 is that you're ceasing work and you intend to retire. Or if you were to work, it'd be less than 10 hours per week. So that's the definition for retirement under age 60 to meet a condition of release. From age 60 up to age 65, you can cease work without an intention to retire. So you could actually just simply change jobs, or if you have two jobs, ceasing employment with one job meets the condition of release. So again, meeting a condition of release means that you meet that retirement definition and you can access your superannuation in an unrestricted way. Now, the one thing that people who work for Catholic education need to know is that if you're in the same employer, sort of the same diocese, and you're just changing schools, that's not changing employment. That's still with the same employer. So that wouldn't meet a condition of release. But of course, if you go from one diocese to another diocese and you've terminated your employment arrangement, that would meet a condition of release to be able to have unrestricted access to your superannuation. So that's between age 60 and 64. From 65, you meet a condition of release for superannuation, irrespective of whether you're retired or you're going to continue working full-time, part-time, or casually. So meeting the age of 65 meets a condition of release for superannuation. And meeting a condition release means that you have unrestricted access to your superannuation, which means you could access it by way of a lump sum, partial lump sum and income stream, or you could leave it there and just draw on it when you want.
Another common strategy, and you'll hear this at every barbecue in the land, people will talk about salary sacrifice and what are the advantages to it and why you should do it. Essentially, it's a tax play because there's a significant difference between salary sacrificing and often taking your earnings as salary and payable to your bank account. Tina, can you explain just how that works in terms of the gap between the 15% and your marginal tax rate, please?
So on this table, you can see on the brackets on the income tax brackets. So earnings that you generate in taxable income. So that's your wages as well as any investment earnings up to 18,200. It's under the tax-free threshold, so you don't pay any tax. But for once you start earning more than that, so every dollar above that in the next bracket, which is the 18,201 up to 45,000, your marginal tax rate is 19%. And for most people who are working full-time, they're going to fall into the marginal rate of 32.5%, which is for every dollar that you earn above 45,000 up to 120,000. So if you can imagine, basically the employer payroll is going to be working out how much income tax will be needed to be deducted from your fortnightly pay, so you don't have to worry about that. But essentially, for every dollar that's above that 45,000, there's 32.5 cents in the dollar. And then, of course, the next bracket goes up to 37, and then more than 180,000, we've got 45%. Now, the benefit you gain from salary sacrificing is that you're redirecting that income into superannuation. So for the bracket between 45 and up to 120,000, instead of paying 32.5% income tax on that dollar, if it goes into superannuation, you're paying 15%. So you're getting an advantage. Of course, that advantage is not going to be the case if your earnings are below that marginal rate of under 18,200. That would be zero. So it wouldn't be tax effective for you to salary sacrifice if your earnings fall below that. But anything above that, you are going to get a tax advantage, and that's more money you get to keep in your hands, but it's in the superannuation account.
So we've just looked at one of the ways you can get money into superannuation via salary sacrifice, and that is considered, as you can see here, one of the ways to get money into superannuation concessionally. Now, the term concessional can be confusing to people. Whether people use the term concessional or pre-tax, essentially it's the same thing. And there are a variety of different ways to get money into superannuation in this concessional way. One, of course, is the employer contributions, which are mandated, and the superannuation guarantee. One is salary sacrifice, which we've just looked at. Another one is the additional contributions from employers. And there's another one called personal deductible, which is where you put the money from your bank account into super, but you later claim it as a tax deduction. Tina, can you just speak a bit further about that one and on any other concessional contributions that I may have missed?
Certainly, I think the personal deductible is the one that most people may not be aware of, because there were several changes that were made in the legislation, and previous to this change, personal deductible could only be made by people who were mostly self-employed. Now it's available to anyone to be able to make a personal deductible contribution. Now, what you need to understand when you are making a personal deductible contribution is when you put the contribution into the fund, you also need to let the fund know that that is a personal deductible contribution, and most funds will have a form that you need to submit to let them know that that's the case, and that's so that it can be reported appropriately to the ATO so that they can be treated as a concessional contribution. Now, all of those contributions in the concessional contribution bracket, which is your employer, your super guarantee, salary sacrifice, any employer additional, and any personal deductible contribution you make, it's all measured under the concessional contribution cap. So you need to make sure if you are making additional contributions in the concessional bracket that you don't breach that concessional cap, and that for this financial year is 27.5 since the 1st of July 2021. So all concessional contributions are taxed at 15%, and the advantage, of course, is that if you received it as income, you'd be paying marginal rate. So with the personal deductible, for example, you get to deduct it off your taxable income. And if you have already paid income tax on that, you'll get a refund for the difference in tax.
Thank you, Tina. And the other obvious way to put money into super is what we call non-concessional. So this is what we would call, instead of pre-tax, this is post-tax. So this is money that's you've already paid income tax on. So think of it as money that's in your bank account. So you've already paid income tax. So the allowance and the cap is far more generous. As you can see there, $110,000 per annum, and you can use a 3-year provisioning avenue that allows you to put in up to 330,000 in a single year, but you are using your 3-year allowance if you like. You'll notice between 67 and 74, things get a little bit more complicated because there's currently a work test. Although, Tina, correct me if I'm wrong, but under the last budget, that work test, not yet legislated, but likely to be, will be dropped for the coming financial year. Am I correct in saying that?
Well, it hasn't been legislated, so we don't know for sure. But yes, so that will make things a little bit simpler in not having to meet the work test.
Excellent.
Watch that space, I could say.
Yeah, let's hope, because the work test, many consider the work test to be an unnecessary impediment, quite honestly, to get money into superannuation. And if it wasn't there, I think the industry would rejoice. And for those over, as you can see there, 75 and over, the idea is you are now taking money and drawing down, so you're not contributing any additional money to superannuation. Other ways to contribute, and these are some of these are relatively new. The Downsizer one is relatively new. Tina, you may have seen a few members come in and want to exercise this strategy. If you'd be good enough just to talk through some of the intricacies with that, that'd be terrific.
I certainly have, since the Downsizer eligibility rules came in. And sometimes that's just because people have downsized as a result of their lifestyle changing, and they've ended up with surplus funds from that. And with the Downsizer, it's essentially allowing people who are, there is an age criteria, so there's a minimum age 65. So from age 65 onwards, if you do sell your home, and you have got surplus money from the sale of that property, you can make a contribution into superannuation. There are some other provisions you've got to meet, like the home has to be your principal place of residence for at least 10 years, and your contribution that you make for that Downsizer needs to be done within 90 days of settlement. So it's important to just check all those minor small rules to make sure that you meet it, but it does give people the avenue to utilise their superannuation as a investment vehicle, particularly if they're needing to boost their retirement funding, and the Downsizer proceeds will be able to do that. The advantage, as I said, is it's goes into superannuation. You can then create your income stream and it's tax-free. Flexibility to draw pension payments. You can't really get any simpler than that.
And the big question, how can I access my super? This is a very common question, naturally enough, members ask. Not only when can I get it, but how do I access it, and in what forms can I access it? Well, essentially, you can access it in 2 ways. When you reach your preservation age and you meet, as Tina referred to, one of the criteria, one of the release conditions, you can take it as a lump sum if you wish, However, I've got to say, most people, in my experience, choose to take an income stream and have that income stream to last for most of their, if not all their retirement. Tina, do you just want to speak a little bit about what you find with members? What configurations do they like to take when they're drawing money down?
Certainly. When we are providing advice, we're really focused on identifying what are the needs. And usually the need is regular money to live on to fund retirement. And sometimes the need is to access a lump sum for an immediate expenditure. Sometimes it's to pay down any residual loans that they've still got hanging around. So lump sums can be utilised for that. But typically thereafter, most people want to have a regular income, which is sort of replicating what they've been accustomed to, which is a regular wage. But the difference is that you're paying yourself. And the advantage with the income stream is that you've got the flexibility to select a amount of pension payment that you want to receive. And with Australian Catholic Super, the pension payments can be paid weekly, fortnightly, monthly. So the level of frequency is selected by you based on how you want to manage your cash flow. But for most people, they're used to a fortnightly pay, and a fortnightly pension pretty much replicates the ability to do that. The other thing with an income stream is it doesn't preclude you from drawing a lump sum. So if you do need a lump sum in the future, you've got access to that to draw a lump sum as well. So the income stream is not limited to just a regular payment. You also have that flexibility to draw a lump sum. And of course, the key thing to understand is that that money will last as long as there's money there. So that's going to be important that you manage your spending so that it can last your retirement.
Typically, when people go into retirement, this is the way they would do it. They would move from what we call the superannuation or the accumulation phase to the allocated pension, which is essentially the drawdown phase. So there are distinctly different characteristics between a superannuation account and a pension account. As you can see there, with a superannuation account, you can easily add money, and it's designed to have money added to it. Whereas once you go into the pension account, it's designed to have money exit from it, either in the form of lump sums or regular payments, as Tina just referred, but it doesn't accept additional money. So a very important distinction, and one that we see members sometimes get a little confused. They want to add money to the allocated pension, and you actually can't do that. The only way to do it is to set up a new allocated pension. Tina, can you just add to that, just in your experience, if I've missed anything there with the way members respond when they're moving from that super to pension phase?
Certainly, Wayne, I think what you pointed out is clear. I mean, is pretty much common that some people do forget that once you have an allocated pension, if you want to add more superannuation money, that could be from a downsizer, maybe it's from an inheritance. It has to go into a superannuation account. And if you haven't got one open at the time because you've closed it off and started a pension, well, then you have to open a super account. That's easy enough. It's no different from, opening a bank account. So the main thing is that both superannuation accumulation and pension monies sit under the superannuation umbrella, but they are in different phases. So the superannuation account accumulation allows contributions to be received, but it's not paying out a pension payment. Even though you can meet a condition of release, you can draw lump sums out of it, but the product, the structure itself does not allow the facilitation of a regular payment. That's where the pension account comes in. But of course, when you transfer money to create a pension account, it is pretty much not, it will be just paying out a pension payment, paying out a lump sum. You cannot add to it, to that existing pension. So the way in which we can add additional money to a pension means that we have to close off the existing pension, consolidate it with that super account, and then restart a new pension. But it's important if you're going to do any of those restructuring to get advice, because sometimes there may be implications. That could be Centrelink implications. At the moment, there's no tax implications, but there are transfer cap balance implications. So it's quite important to seek advice even though you can do it, it's important to understand to ensure that there's no adverse implications.
Thank you, Tina. And the other point I meant to mention is, of course, the tax. Earnings in superannuation, as you can see, they're taxed at 15%, whereas earnings in pension are tax-free. So the advantage in super, if you like, is the flexibility to add money. The advantage in the pension account is the earnings, not the balance. The earnings are completely tax-free. However, once you go into that pension phase, you do need to do drawdowns. You need to take out a certain amount of money. But the benefit, obviously, is the earnings are all tax-free. The allocated pension, or the pension phase as we refer to it, moves through these steps. So as Tina mentioned, you contribute to super, you accumulate the funds in super. Typically when you retire, you move to pension phase, although you don't have to. It's not legislated, but most people do because they want to start a drawdown. You can see from those age brackets the importance of trying to get to 60, because once you get to 60, things become much clearer and everything becomes tax-free. If you're wanting to take money earlier, there can be some tax implications. And of course, as I mentioned before, once you go into the pension phase, there are minimum drawdowns that are required. So you get the tax-free status on the earnings, but if there's a downside, it is you need to draw down a particular amount of money depending on how old you are. And the older you get, the higher that percentage of minimum drawdown. Tina, is there anything I have missed on that one, or anything to add?
I think the withdrawal requirement for a pension generally is not really an issue, because most people, when they're in retirement, they need money to live on, and the amount that they're drawing down would typically be, at least the minimum, and sometimes more than the minimum anyway. So, but the one thing to understand with regards to an allocated pension is they are designed by way of the structure of the requirement to draw a minimum payment that it will be fully paid out eventually. It is a long time. It'll be more likely past most people's lifetime, but it is designed as a structure to be drawing down eventually over time, but you've got the flexibility to draw it out faster if you want.
With regard to Australian Catholic Super, when we talk about the pension, there's two distinctions we make. One is retired choice. Retired choice is the product that gives you control of where your money's invested and where your money comes from. So which portfolio do you wish to draw down from? So you can have complete control not only on where it's invested in the pension phase, but also where the drawings come from. So complete flexibility. There's, Tina, is there anything to add on retired choice? Sorry, I should refer to yourself. You use it.
No, not at all. I think the main thing in terms of the retired choice is that, as you said, the investment choice, and at the end of the day, people can direct how conservative, how aggressive they would like that investment to be. And the menu of available investment choice is similar, or if not the same, as their superannuation account. So they've got familiarity there.
In terms of choices, the next obvious question is, well, if I've got choices of where my money's invested, what are those choices? As you can see there, on the left, we've got all the diversified funds, what we call the diversified funds, particularly from conservative balance, cap stable balance, conservative and socially responsible, where they'll have a blend and they'll have a mix of what we call asset classes. And the asset classes are those listed on the right. So you can choose whichever composition you like. You can choose as many of these as you wish, or as few of these as you wish. So one of the big advantages for those who like retired choice is that, as I say, they get to choose exactly where their money's invested, what asset class, or if they're choosing on the more diversified side, they can choose what level of volatility am I really comfortable with. So, and this is the key question for those who want to use retired choice. Everyone loves volatility when it's up. Few people like it when it's down. So it's a question of how much volatility can I accept given that I'm chasing X amount of return. Tina, just want to talk a little bit about that risk return dance, if you like, that we go into when we talk about choice.
Certainly, the thing that I think a lot of people need to understand when you're moving from accumulation working to when you're moving into retirement drawing down, the volatility can have a huge impact. So while we want to have a higher return so that we can ensure that our earnings can at least keep up with inflation or beat inflation for our retirement, you also need to be comfortable that you can stick with the strategy if there is a major downturn, if you have a high level of exposure to the more risky assets like shares and property. Of course, in terms of when it comes to financial advice, we can help members with that by understanding their risk tolerance and their financial overall financial situation. Then we're able to make a recommendation on the investment portfolio that can suit their situation in regards to the risk and return trade-off. Because that is a dilemma that every investor has to face, is that if you want higher returns, you're going to have to accept more volatility risk. And of course, if you're concerned about volatility risk, you may have to accept a lower return. The dilemma we have is over time, particularly in the long term, inflation is going to erode your purchasing power. So it's important that you have some growth assets, but at the same time, you also need to understand the volatility risk that is associated with more growth assets. But we're able to, as I said, help members work through that and see how that fits in with their overall financial situation.
Thanks, Tina. The other option is what we refer to as retire smart. So this is a portfolio where the choice is essentially made for you. So it chooses an investment mix that attempts to maximize the return while minimizing volatility, particularly for those in retirement phase, because volatility, as Tina mentioned, is key. Volatility when you're in drawdown phase is actually far riskier than when you're in accumulation phase. So the Retire Smart product uses what we call a two-bucket investment model, where you have those assets that are trying to grow that you won't be drawing down upon in the short term, because it's building what we call a cash bucket, which you are able to draw from. And if the market does become volatile, then obviously the cash bucket would be very, very stable throughout that period. So until you're needing to dip into those growth assets, which is going to be 3 to 5 years away, you've got some protection from volatility. So the Retire Smart product is engineered for those who don't wish to make a choice on portfolios and where their money's invested, and is particularly suited for those in drawdown phase or the pension phase, as we say. Tina, is there anything to add to the Retire Smart? Because you would see a lot of this, I suspect.
I think the main thing that that members need to understand with the Retire Smart is that, as you say, it's designed so that if you're drawing down, because it's based on how much pension payment you're going to be drawing, that drives how much goes into the cash bucket. It's 2 years of pension payments in the cash bucket, and then the rest of it goes into the growth bucket. So it's designed so that surplus funds that you're not going to be drawing out in pension payment is invested more aggressively. Now, that may not necessarily be something that everyone's comfortable with regards to risk. So while it's being structured that way to minimize the risk of having to draw down on growth assets when you don't need that, it does still mean that you're exposed to volatility to the level that your balance could be lower if there is a downturn, but you're just not drawing on that asset. So you can afford to hold on to it, but you still got to be able to tolerate that.
With regard to retirement options, we mentioned, and Tina just mentioned how the growth options and the growth assets feed into the cash distributions, and excess cash can feed back to those growth assets. Here we're just demonstrating that visually. So the growth assets provide the cash or the distributions to fill the cash bucket from which you take your pension payments. If there's excessive cash, you can see how that could be invested back into those growth assets that you hold. Tina, is there anything beyond what I've said with regard to that, or that's just simply the mechanics of the way it works?
Pretty much the mechanics. As I said, the main thing to understand is your growth assets are going to be where your earnings are going to come from, but there is capital fluctuation as well as earnings fluctuation because there are more invested in your riskier assets, which are your shares and property.
Longevity, and sometimes the industry politely refers to longevity risk, which essentially means you've outlived your money. So longevity risk is real, and a lot of people really do feel longevity risk, and it can be a perception rather than a reality. And this is why we say advice is so important, because people often will ask, when can I retire? Well, if you have sufficient money, you can retire whenever you choose. It comes to that question of, do I have enough? And Australian Catholic Super, like many providers, has projection tools available on the website, and we encourage everyone to investigate those. But it does depend very much on your situation and how much you intend to spend and what lifestyle you wish to have, which is what we referred to earlier with those ASFA numbers that try and give, they try and quantify what you are likely to spend. Tina, can you also talk to how COVID over the last couple of years has impacted this?
There certainly was a downturn or major downturn in the share market in that first month of the pandemic last year in 2020, and that did cause some concern with members because of the unknown, the uncertainty at the time, what that would mean to their investment. But as it turned out, within I think a couple of months, the market had then bounced back, and actually shares have done quite well in the last 12 months. The main thing to understand is that with investment markets, there are going to be shocks, and that can have a temporary downturn to your investments, but it's important to stick with your long-term strategy. Has it affected the longevity of the investment capital? I don't think so. As I said, some people have actually spent less in the last 2 years than they planned. So in that regard, they've got more money than they had expected to be 2 years down the track. But of course, you know, the main thing with the longevity risk is really making sure that you're managing your spending within the capacity that your funds have to last your lifetime. And we're able to provide financial forecasting tools to be able to give some sense of perspective on that question. And that's where I think a lot of people find very useful. We can further tailor that a little bit more in that if you're most likely may have your bigger spending years in, you know, your first 10, 15 years of retirement. So we can even tailor that sort of expenditure assumption even more to give a better projection.
We have an example here of just how, with a bit of planning and sometimes with a bit of advice, we can have a really good outcome, and you can do a lot to address that concern around longevity risk. So in this example, we've got a couple, as you can see there, 65 years of age, 300,000 in super each. They own their own home. They're wanting $63,000 per annum, which, as we saw, puts them towards the comfortable end of drawdown and income in retirement. They're non-super investments, as you can see, they don't have any. Inflation, we're assuming at 2.5, rate of return at 5, and that will rise in living. They want to rise in living standards throughout their retirement. and everything being displayed in present value. If we have a look at this, we can see how this couple draw down not just the capital, but also the earnings that would be accumulated with that investment over the period. And you can see it exhausts at, I think you can see it exhausts after 93 years old. So that's beyond life expectancy of current male and female. So in this case, if they were to pass at life expectancy, there would be a small amount going to the estate or to the beneficiaries. But what it means is the planning here has worked. So they didn't need to fear running out of money in retirement because they sought advice and because they chose an income level that was sustainable with those various assumptions. They lived a relatively stress-free retirement, financially at least, and the product did exactly what it should. Tina, can you please add to that? Because you would assist people.
I think where a lot of people get concerned, particularly when they start drawing on their retirement funds, is the balance going down. That is definitely a concern because they're accustomed to seeing their money going up when they're working and accumulating. And so psychologically, you're expecting it to go up all the time. And when you see it going down, it can be quite alarming. So the projections just help you to give a track of how it's progressing so that you don't have to be alarmed, and you can get a sense of, okay, it is going down, but it is expected to go down, and as long as it's not going faster than the projection, I'm still on track. That's the main thing that I think a lot of people might struggle with, particularly when they start drawing on their superannuation assets to a level where they can't sustain the capital because they're drawing both income and capital over time.
And you can see from the last chart how the capital just worked itself down throughout their retirement, but there were actually two components in there. As you can see here, there was their own account-based pension, but there was also money coming from Centrelink as well. So for most people, and I think it's around 4 in 5, Tina, feel free to correct me on that, get some form of age pension in retirement. So as I say, the overwhelming majority of retirees get some form of age pension. They may not get full age pension, but they get some form of. So it complements what they have. And it's this joint payment, if you like, that matters most. So I always say to people, don't be hugely anxious that you don't feel as if at this point you can fully fund your retirement. Most people actually don't fully fund their own retirement. Self-funded retirees are quite scarce in many ways. As I say, most people do rely on age pension to some extent. Tina, would you like to add to that?
Sometimes it might be that they're self-funded. In this case here, they're self-funded for the first year because they're actually retiring before they're eligible for an age pension. So they're self-funded for a year, and then it's the following year where they've got their part age pension kicking in. And it's also the case for some people that they are self-funded for a number of years perhaps, and it's not until their assets have dropped below the upper age pension limits, which we'll talk about Centrelink in a moment, where they start to come into age pension. What we are able to identify with the projection is to ensure that they are able to fund their whole retirement, and part of that could be self-funded, part of that could be partially funded, or all of it. But in this example, you can see there's figures floating around that you need $1 million to retire, and we can illustrate here that if you're retiring at pension age and your lifestyle is within the ASPA comfortable retirement figure, that it is possible for you to have that comfortable retirement if you can manage your spending around that $63,000 mark. In that case, a superannuation amount of $600,000 is able to fund that comfortable retirement with income support from the age pension.
The other question we often get is, when I get to age pension age, what about my eligibility criteria for other things, and largely the pension card? So people are very, very interested in that. as I say, most people will get it, but we'll speak a little bit about eligibility and what it means when you get to that drawdown phase. Tina, can you just speak a little bit about eligibility and the assessment criteria for those on Centrelink, if you like?
Certainly. So the age criteria, residency criteria, those are the first two things that you've got to meet. And then I guess it's what we call the assets and the income criteria, and that's a financial measurement based on your wealth. So there are some parameters with that, but essentially both the assets and the income tests are measured, and it's the test that gives you the least or no eligibility that will cut you out of a payment. And depending on that level of assets or income, that determines the payment rate that you would get. So if you're below the lower thresholds, you'll get the full rate, and then if you're a little bit over that, you're progressively getting less until it gets cut out at the upper threshold. So we'll go into those thresholds. But age criteria, you can see there, basically it is progressively moving through to age 67 for anyone who's born on or after the 1st of January 1957. But if you're born before that, 66 and 6 months is your eligibility age. Now, if you're a member of a couple and one person's eligible but the other person is not, it will still be that you're measured as a couple under the couple rates for assets and income, which I'll be going through the next few slides. However, just the one member of the couple would be eligible for half the couple rate. Okay, so let's look at the assets test. So assuming that you have met the age criteria and the residency criteria, the financial tests for the assets first. In this slide, you can see for amounts, there's a different limit for a single person homeowner and a single non-homeowner, as there is for a couple homeowner and couple non-homeowner. So in this case, below 270,500 of assets and up to 593,000 of assets, you're getting, below 270,500, you get full age pension. Above that, up to 593, it's a part age pension, and above 593, you're cut out of pension. You can see with the non-homeowner rates, the limits are higher, and that's to accommodate for the fact that you're going to need more investment capital in order to also fund your housing, because you'll be paying, you don't own your home, so you've got to be paying rent. So the assets tests are where most people will get pretty much affected. The next slide here, you've got the couple homeowner. So below $405,000 full age pension, between 405 up to 891,000, it's a part age pension, and anything above the upper limit, there's no age pension. Now, just because you don't qualify for a pension at the pension age, it doesn't mean you're precluded forever. If your assets fall within those thresholds, you can then apply. And again, we can see a larger amount for the couple non-homeowner limits. Okay, let's move on to the incomes test. So incomes test works in a similar way, and this is based on, actually I will mention, a lot of people do ask what is in the assets test. So it's pretty much everything you own with the exception of your principal place of residence. So your home is excluded, but everything else that's in your name, so that's bank accounts, superannuation accounts, allocated pension accounts, shares, rental property, second holiday home, land, etc. That's all accessible assets. It also includes your car as well as your personal assets, your personal effects as well. So that's the assets. The income test is measured in a similar way in that below the lower threshold, in this case $180 a fortnight for a single person, or an annual amount of $4,680, you're getting the full age pension under the income test, and then it's progressively reduced when your income starts going up above $2,115 a fortnight, no pension. The income test is actually quite generous when you compare it to the assets test, and it's most often people get knocked out under the assets test more so than the incomes test. And what's counted as income? Well, it's income that you derive from your assets, and not all assets generate income, for example, but the assets that do generate income are going to be contributing to that income test. So, for example, shares, bank accounts, superannuation, allocated pensions, they all have an income component and they will be incorporated in this income test. But where the income test also can be impacted is if you're working part-time or casually in retirement, but you can see it's actually quite generous. So there is room under the income test for you to be getting a part age pension even when you're working. So what are the rates? The rates are dependent upon your eligibility under the assets and income, but these are the maximum rates that you'll be able to get. So for a single person, the maximum age pension is $25,155. So if you're below the lower threshold under both income and assets tests, then you're eligible for the full age pension. For the couple rate, it's slightly less per person compared to the single rate, and it's a total amount of $37,924 per year. However, if you're a couple and you've had to live separately due to ill health, then you'll each get the single rate.
Thank you, Tina. The other one people always ask about is the healthcare card, and some people are very passionate about this. So, Tina, would you be good enough to walk us through when we get it, when we can't, and what criteria do we need to meet to get this all-important seniors healthcare card?
The situation is that if you're eligible for a part age pension, you will get the pension concession card, which provides you with fringe benefits, which include the health concessions. Now, for those people who are not eligible for an age pension because they're over the assets test or the incomes test, so they're already eligible pension age, but they don't get an age pension due to being over those tests, then they may be eligible for the Commonwealth Seniors Healthcare Card. The Seniors Healthcare Card is not asset tested, but it is income tested. So you can see there the income test limits. For a single person, if your income is below $57,761 per annum, you can get the Commonwealth Seniors Healthcare Card. And for a couple, if it's below $92,416 per annum, you would get the healthcare card. And for a lot of retirees, they do fall into eligibility for the Commonwealth Seniors Healthcare Card if they're not on a part age pension. The Commonwealth Seniors Healthcare Card really is going to help with any medical expenses like medicine. You'll get that at a cheaper rate, and maybe and also bulk billing at doctor's visit, which is where I think a lot of people are concerned as they're getting older with increasing cost of health expenses.
Thank you, Tina. There's also complementary benefits as well offered by many of the states. Can you talk to those, or particularly those that you're familiar with in New South Wales? Other benefits you can receive?
So the New South Wales have the New South Wales Seniors Card, and that's from age 60 years of age if you are retired, or I think it has provision for part-time. And I can't remember the number of hours. I think it's something like 20 hours. If you work less than 20 hours, you could get that seniors card. And it's a state-based card, as you mentioned, and that could give you discounts on some of those utilities and public transport. So all of it adds up. You could be looking at, with regards to health, cheaper medicine and some of these fringe benefits, it could add up to $1,000 to $2,000 per annum, which is money that you don't have to spend out of your pocket, and that's going to help you be able to sustain your retirement, hopefully, within the funds that you have.
Thank you, Tina. It's fair to say, yeah, between the state governments and the federal governments, there's quite a lot of concessions to be had. For the other areas of financial planning that we often don't refer to as perhaps as much as we should, in terms of wills, power of attorneys, and nominating beneficiaries, all that we would classify as estate planning issues, can you just speak to that in terms of how you're able to help people, and more particularly, I guess, the importance of having some of these things in order before, before they become critical, if you like.
I think the main thing with estate planning, particularly around superannuation and pension, is that a lot of people may not be aware that it can be, or it is paid outside of the will. So if you have a beneficiary nomination, it can be paid out fairly quickly rather than going through the will. And with nominating beneficiaries on your superannuation, with the superannuation account, when you're nominating a beneficiary, you can select to make that nomination binding. And one of the major advantage of binding nomination is the certainty of that nomination being paid as you have instructed. That's where there's a little bit of confusion. If it's a non-binding nomination just means that there's still room for the trustee to make a final decision should there be a challenge to that nomination. And it's pretty rare, but it can happen. Whereas if you have a binding nomination, there's no room for any challenges. It will be paid exactly as you instructed to whom you've requested it to be paid to. And the process of making a binding nomination is quite simple. You just need to make sure you've got two witnesses on that beneficiary nomination form, and you also need to redeclare it every 3 years. But that will certainly give certainty. The beneficiary nomination for a pension account can be made, particularly with people who are married or in partnership. You can have it as a reversion beneficiary, and that just means that you're requesting that that pension be transferred, reverted to your surviving spouse. So that also makes it a lot simpler as well. With regards to other assets that forms outside of superannuation, you will need to have instructions by way of having a valid will. And again, it's important, but sometimes not seen as urgent. However, in terms of financial planning, we want to make sure that all those what-if scenarios are taken care of. So you can have peace of mind that these have already been thought of and sorted out before any unexpected event. So you've got the wills that deals with distribution of assets on death, and the power of attorney. So if you have an unexpected illness or accident where you lose capacity to make a financial decision, having that power of attorney means you've already appointed someone you trust who can take over that for you.
Thank you, Tina. And the other area, of course, we need to address, and this is often the last chapter in people's lives, and increasingly an important one as life expectancy goes up and up and up, is aged care. A complicated area, and often an overwhelmingly complicated area for the children of those impacted. Tina, can you just quickly speak briefly about some of the difficulties and the nuances with aged care?
Aged care often is not something that is pleasant to think about. Most people don't want to think about aging and having to possibly move into a residential facility where they may need 24/7 care, mainly because it's just not a pleasant thing to think about. But it is important to I guess understand and talk to your family, particularly if you've got if you've appointed, say, your power of attorney, so that they understand what your wishes are, but also seeking advice, because it is a complicated financial circumstance in terms of funding aged care, in terms of the cost of getting in, and also what to do with the assets. So what do we do with the principal place of residence? What do we do with superannuation assets, shares and property? Some of those decisions have an impact in regards to the cost that you would end up paying to get into a facility, as well as the ongoing cost as well.
Thank you, Tina. And just how planners can assist. I mean, we've spoken a little bit tonight about how planners can assist, but hopefully, as you've heard from Tina, planners can assist in many, many ways, whether it's saving money on retirement, helping with Centrelink. As you can see, it's got some complexities. How long will your money last? What your goals are, the estate planning issues we referred to, and also those aged care issues. and also provide advice on the non-superannuation investments, because they will become very, very important in your retirement as well. There are other non-tangible benefits to getting advice. And Tina, can you just speak to those if you would?
I think what most people have, I guess, concerns about is making sure that they can be comfortable throughout their retirement and that their funds can support them through their retirement. And sometimes it's very difficult to grasp that with actually seeing the numbers, and that's what we can help with. We can provide a financial forecast to give you a sense of direction, and then we can further enhance it with the strategies to get a better outcome. Now, everybody sort of talks about they want to save tax and invest and get a better return. All of that is well and good, but it needs to be linked back to giving you that comfort in retirement. And I think that's one of the intangibles that it's hard to grasp, because we can illustrate that some of the strategies will certainly save you tax, but it needs to, I think, all link back to give you a sense of comfort that what you've got set up, how you're the decisions you're making with regards to how you spend your money and where that's leading to, so that you don't have to be concerned that you're going to be having financial stress when you're particularly in your latter part of your retirement. I think that's definitely something that a lot of the members we speak to and provide advice and help with find very, very comforting.
And in terms of advice offerings, just to extend on what Tina's saying, is there are a variety of types. So there's, naturally enough, there's general advice you can get whenever you wish. There's help over the phone, but there's also comprehensive advice. And that's where people like Tina come into play. So for those of you that need to speak about your own situation beyond not just your super fund, but beyond your super fund and all your assets, that's when the comprehensive offering can really come into play. So if you do have any further questions on that, please just let us know and we'll be able to provide whatever information you like. Or if you wish to catch up with a financial planner and scope your situation and understand where you are, please feel free to let us know. One of the issues that came up this year, and you may have heard of this YFYS, it's Your Future, Your Super. Essentially, it was a test that was introduced by the regulator over the last couple of years. It was legislated only this year and commenced, as you can see, this year. I'll be fairly brief because impacted members have already been written to and this has already been explained, but just for the interest of disclosure. So we were notified that our default option, and that's all this test refers to, didn't actually pass the test. So the test specifically looks at the 7-year performance of your MySuper or your default option. And the difficulty with assessing Australian Catholic Super is that option changed. So it is now lifetime one and has been since 2018. So we're really referring to the performance of that pre-2018 period, if you like. And there's essentially there were two issues. One was the shares that were chosen at the time, and the other is the alternative investments that were chosen at the time. For those that are really interested in the topic, there is really detailed information available on the website. As I said before, for those that were impacted, we have communicated with those members and provided this information already. But as I say, for the purposes of disclosure, all this information is available. We do encourage people to compare Australian Catholic Super to other funds in the market. There are a variety of comparison tools available. The ATO also offer one, so feel free to use it. There are links on our website. And as I say, we've already communicated this, but we can't say it often enough. Please, if you do have questions or concerns with this, let us know. Lifetime One, as I mentioned, was introduced as the default option or the My Super option from 2018. And just to give people some comfort, it has achieved its benchmarks internally. So as you can see there, you can see the return for the financial year gone at 20.9%. So, it's performed, as I say, to expectation and in some ways beyond. And if you have a look at the longer term performance back to 3 years, you can see, as you can see there, it's been fairly solid all the way through. I should point out, and Tina's spoken to this, that when you're using Lifetime One, it does blend the growth assets against the volatility. So what happens is over time, and as you get older, the portfolio naturally enough becomes less volatile and actually gets invested more conservatively. So that is the price you pay for stability of return, if you like. You don't achieve necessarily the highs, but you get the stability. And for most people, as I say, particularly in the retirement phase or heading to the retirement phase, it's that lack of volatility and stability that actually becomes critically important. So the fund outlook is always to provide the best outcomes and best financial interests we can to all the members. It's actually the role of the trustee. So whenever you see a trustee being referred to in a superannuation fund, take some comfort that the role of the trustee is to look after the beneficial interests of all the members. So structurally, that's how super funds operate. And Australian Catholic Super is no different in that regard. We also encourage people to use the member portal. So all your information is always available. It's literally 3 mouse clicks and you can get pretty much all the information you would ever want on your superannuation and your insurances if you're holding that in your superannuation. And you can also make amendments to any of this. So when we referred earlier to investment choices, this is exactly where you can choose to make different investment choices if you wish. If you wish to switch portfolios, this is how you can do it. As you can see there, the portal offers a lot of other things you can do. Make a contribution, obviously see your balance, change the investment options, as I mentioned. You can also alter and work out your insurance needs. And we would say, critically, nominate a beneficiary. We would always encourage people to nominate a beneficiary on their holdings. We would also say, please make sure your current email and mobile details are up to date and correct. Because if they're not, what happens is whenever you go to do something or log in, we can't get the secondary authorization because we're not able to send you a code to your phone, for example. So it's very important that you keep that information of both email and mobile number up to date. Is there anything else I should mention on that front, Tina, with regard to, and is there anything members often forget to do that they could update on the portal?
I think mainly it's making sure the the contact details are up to date. Because if we've got contact details up to date, then you know you're getting all the correspondence that you're being sent.
Excellent, thank you. Also, as mentioned, we always encourage people to contact us, whether it's via the phone or whether it's via the email. If you do have any questions, always ask. The regional managers like myself are always available. Financial planners such as Tina are always available. But I do now just want to circle back to Justin, who's been monitoring the chat box, just to ensure that we haven't left any questions outstanding. So Justin, if I can just bring you in at this point, can you just let us know if there are any outstanding issues to address?
No, thanks, Wayne. There's been a few questions coming through the chat box where I've just responded back to people directly because they've been personal questions or personal information that we can't disclose today. But I'll just bring a couple to mention that maybe you or Tina can touch on, which are more of a general nature. And the first one is, will I have to pay tax if I retire at age 60? But also, I'll just ask people if they've got any questions, just put them in that Q&A box or the chat. And if you get those in pretty quickly, we'll get to them. Otherwise, your local RM will respond to you tomorrow.
Thank you. Just with regard to the question of turning 60 and tax. So if you turn 60, and Tina, correct me if I need correcting here. If you turn 60 and you're in superannuation, you're able to take lump sums tax-free if you meet those release conditions and preservation rules, which you will at age 60. But you will pay tax on the earnings, not the balance, just the earnings. So if the fund, for example, was to achieve a 10% return, there would be a 1.5% tax payable on the earnings. So just bear that in mind. If you move to the allocated pension, tax-free. Tina, is there anything I've left out there?
Okay, so it's the same. If while it stays in superannuation, it's taxed internally within the superannuation fund, and when it goes to an allocated pension, if you're in retirement, the allocated pension is tax-free. So, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks,
Was there
Tina.
anything else, Justin?
Yeah, Tina, there's two questions. They're very similar. Can I access my super without actually retiring? And the other one is, can I officially retire to access my super, then rejoin the workforce? Just want to touch on those 2 points.
Yeah, that has to do with your preservation age, meeting preservation age. The ability to access your superannuation is possible if you've met the preservation age, but you haven't retired, and you can access by way of a transition to retirement pension. What that allows you to do is, having reached the minimum preservation age, you can use your accumulated superannuation to create a transition to retirement pension and start receiving a pension payment. There are some limitations on that. You cannot make a lump sum because you haven't met the full condition of release, and the pension payments that you receive from that transition pension is limited to 10% of the balance annually. So that's where you can access it when you haven't met a full retirement condition, but you've met that preservation age. What was the other question, Justin?
So can I access my super without actually retiring?
Yeah, so that's the access.
Sorry, so can I officially retire to access my super and then rejoin the workforce?
Yeah, so retirement, again, if you are meeting a retirement condition of release from age 60, there is no requirement for you to actually not work at all. It's just the fact that you've changed an employment arrangement, you meet that retirement definition. If you're under 60, so from age 58, you've met the preservation age and you decide you wanted to retire, you can obviously meet that retirement condition by confirming that you've stopped work and you intend to retire. If the circumstances change whereby, let's say after some time you got bored or you were offered a job you couldn't say no to, it is possible for you to, obviously go back to work, but you've already met the retirement definition on that superannuation money at the time when you met that retirement condition. So that doesn't change that, but it does change any new money that will come in later on when you start resuming employment.
Thanks, Tina. Question that's just come in: how are pre-tax contributions counted on your tax return?
So the pre-tax contributions don't count on your tax return. They normally, if it's salary sacrifice, for example, would not show up on your assessable income. It will show up as a reportable superannuation contribution. So it's in the reportable section, not in your taxable income.
Great. And the next question is: can you delay taking your super if you want to stay at work longer? He's actually 65 now, and can you retire basically and not access immediately? So yes.
Yeah, so with superannuation, if it's in an accumulation account, there is no requirement for you to do anything. You can actually leave your funds in the accumulation account indefinitely. Sometimes when we're providing advice on in a personal situation, even though it may be that you don't need to start an income stream because you're still working after age 65, from a strategy point of view, we may consider starting an income stream as part of the strategy for different reasons, and that could be if you've got debt, to accelerate debt reduction. That could be one reason. Another reason could be incomes, moving some of that asset across to a spouse so that you can equalize your superannuation ownership. That may be a strategy that could help with Centrelink benefits in the future. So there's reasons why we might still consider an income stream, even though you may not need it from a strategy point of view, but there's certainly no requirement for you to do anything with your accumulation account, regardless of having reached age 65 or retiring.
Great. And the last one that we have at the moment is, what is the fee for comprehensive advice if you're a member of Australian Catholic Super?
The comprehensive advice fee ranges depending on whether we're providing advice for a single person, for a couple, whether we're only dealing with Australian Catholic Super or other superannuation fund. If we're dealing with insurance and looking at debt reduction strategies, non-superannuation investments. So the complexity of the situation is going to determine the cost of advice, but it can be ranging from $1,000 up to $3,500, depending on those topics that I mentioned, the complexity of the advice.
Great. Thanks, Tina and Wayne. I'll hand back to you guys now to wrap things up. There's no more questions that we'll take tonight, so thank you.
Excellent.
I just mentioned with regards to comprehensive advice, when we do the initial meeting, there's no cost for that initial meeting. That's really the opportunity for us to help you with some general education, but then we're able to assess what the situation is and how we can help and what are the matters that are relevant for us to be able to help you with regards to advice. And that's when we can identify what that cost would be and give you a fixed price quote for your situation.
Thank you, Tina. And thank you to all those who tuned in late today and this evening. And a big thank you to Justin for moderating the questions. And once again, on behalf of everyone, Tina, I'm sure, thank you for your wisdom and expertise. And just a quick reminder to those that are still with us that it will be available tomorrow on YouTube if there's anything you feel you've missed. And we will hopefully speak to you all very shortly. Thank you and good night.
Thank you and good night from me.